Sorry?
There you go. There you can go.
We're supposed to have Roger with his coronation postcards, but Roger's been getting over an illness, as you know, we've all intimated earlier on in the meeting. So, you know, it's a bit much for Roger to be able to take us through the whole of this as a Zoom meeting. And Mark Diserio has kindly offered to contribute with a display that he already had in the back pocket, which is really good. It's the Australian 1955 Threepence Halfpenny Blue, the USA-Australia friendship issue. And, you know, when Mark was talking to me about this probably, I don't know, 2 weeks ago, 3 weeks ago, I thought, gee, what could be interesting about this? I think I'm going to bring myself a pillow and put myself to sleep. But I had a look at the slides and I thought, look at all the work and the research that's been done and all the different things that you can do. So for me, what it is that we have the opportunity as collectors and philatelists to actually grasp an issue which is bog standard common and make it interesting, and to be able to make it interesting in a way that not only collectors but people who are outside in the general public will be able to appreciate and understand. Gee, I actually get what these guys do. So after reviewing the slides, I thought I'm really looking forward to this, as you've probably seen in my brief newsletter. So without me covering on, over to you, Mark, to take us through.
Thank you, Gary. And I do want to thank Roger for the opportunity that he's given me to get this out into the public. This started as a lockdown project, one of many that I did. Because, as you know, Melbourne had, I think, one of the longest lockdowns in the world, so we had plenty of time on our hands, and this was one of the projects. What I particularly like about being able to present this to you is it's not a hugely sophisticated topic, and it's not one that essentially requires a lot of money to build up. And I think that's something that's really important, that people need to understand. You don't need to have deep pockets to have a really interesting collection and to make a display. There are a couple of items that are clearly worth a little bit of money, but most of the items I've picked up on eBay, although I was speaking with Gary Watson earlier, and he did ask me had I had an opportunity to go through any of the material that Rod Perry had, and I was able to say with some pride that I managed to worm my way into one of Rod Perry's plastic tubs some years ago. So
the wormhole is still there. I can show it to you.
Okay, because obviously Rodney is not eBay, so you can imagine that the opportunities in that tub were limited by my income at the time. Anyway, without further ado, if we could go on to the first slide. Now, there are 20 slides. Normally, Zoom presentations or these sort of presentations, one is told that it's about a minute per slide, so that's 20 minutes. But I hope as we go through, Frank, you're the mediator. I don't know if you want to take live questions or written questions, and we'll deal with them, but we've only got 20 people. This can be very interactive. If people have something,
I reckon just take live questions as you're going. You know, when you finish your slide, just see what people say. You know, if they want to ask any questions at the end.
Good. So please feel free. And the other thing is, there's so much experience out there amongst you, the viewers, that I'm sure that you can give me some information that I can build into this presentation for the future. So, you know, please don't be modest. If we could have the next one, Frank. So the start with this presentation is 1949, and a suggestion made in New York by the Trade Commissioner that who I believe was just starting the sale of Australian stamps. It may have been about this time, maybe a year later or two, maybe a year earlier, but clearly the Trade Commissioner was looking for something in order to ginger up the sales. And I think he came up with this Australian-American Wartime Alliance theme. Coincidentally, a couple of years later, the Australian-American Association was suggesting that there ought to be a stamp issue to coincide with the Queen's unveiling of the USA Memorial, which was to be in February 1954 as part of her first royal tour. So it's a year later after the first suggestion that the authorities decided to issue a USA Memorial stamp, but then they said, well, the memorial will have been open by then. What are we going to tie it to? And I think some bright spark said, oh, we'll do it with the Coral Sea Battle commemorations. And it's hard to imagine now, but there were annual commemorations about Coral Sea, and they were pretty big. And indeed, I was part of one that was run by the naval, one of the naval groups here in Melbourne, probably about 6 years ago. So there's still a few people around that served, not many. And I think for the major people in society, they probably don't even know what the Coral Sea Battle is anymore. But anyway, we'll come to that. But despite that brief background, the stamp has known to signify the friendship between Australia and the US, and hence the common name for the issue. So there's a lot of technical connections with the stamp, but even though it has USA Memorial on it, most people know it by its common name as the friendship stamp. And it was featured as one of the stamps in Richard Brecken's Stamps of the Commonwealth of Australia Royalty. And I've got an excerpt from that on the slide. It's too small to read, but if you want to know a little bit more detail about the background, I do suggest you read what Richard had to say about it. Next slide, please. Now, I came across this while doing some research on the online archives, and unfortunately, it's too small to blow up and have a look at. But this was in Brisbane at the GPO in the Colonnades, and it refers to other USA friendship stamps. And as I say, it's too small to actually blow up and have a look at what they are. Regrettably, because we live in an online society, anything that hasn't been put online is not able to be researched. So the only stamp that I could find prior to 1955 online referring to USA friendship is the 1948 stamp with Canada. But clearly there are many, many more friendship stamps that exist prior to 1955, because if you look at that display, there's a whole page full.
I think lines 2 and 3 are from the Dominican Republic.
Okay, well done. And I wasn't sure whether any of those might have been part of the US Overrun Countries series, but I'm sure that's not the case. And interestingly, if you go on to Wikipedia and look up joint issues, there are hundreds and hundreds and hundreds. But of course, Wikipedia only starts from about 1955 onwards. But it's interesting how so many countries have used the theme, although, as I said, this technically is not a friendship stamp. This is technically a memorial stamp. But the interesting thing when you look back at friendship stamps is how friendships change. And I tell you, it's really interesting that there were Soviet US friendship stamps and China US friendship stamps. Not too many of those being issued at the moment. If we could move on, Frank. Now, this didn't seem interesting when I started researching it, but from a philatelic point of view, the department had the note printing branch run up some designs for the new stamp. And they're the three essays at the bottom, all featuring the memorial, either in full or in part. And you can see that it's a totally unbalanced looking stamp. And it didn't take them long to work out that that's really going to be quite unsuitable as a design. So they had Richard Beck. He was commissioned to produce a design, and that ultimately became acceptable. And with a little bit of modifications and the insertion of a more creditable Queen Elizabeth II, became the basis for the design. But interestingly, it uses there are two interesting features about the Queen. First of all, that she's looking to the right, when in all the other stamps, she's looking to the left, obviously. But it would be quite inappropriate for her to be looking off to the left with the memorial on the right. So clearly they had to modify the design and have her looking right. But also, you can see that there's an elongation of the neck in the final design. And I thought that, I was curious about that, because in my postal stationery research, I had remembered that that was a rejected design for the stationery. You'll see there, I've got a copy of the photographic proof of the rejected design for stationery, and I've used Photoshop to reverse it so it looks to the right. But you can see the elongation, or the extra part of the neck be below the hairline, which is missing on the banknote and is missing on all of the issued stationery. Now, my research into the stationery suggests that the shortening of the neck on the design came from the Stamp Advisory Committee. No idea why they had that idea, because quite personally, I think the photographic proof is more attractive. And I think the use of the longer neck in the accepted design is more attractive as well. The only thing is, I don't think Frank Manley has, I don't know that that's his best bit of engraving. It's credible, but it's just not. When you look at the other images, I don't think it fully captures the look. But anyway, that's a personal view.
Well, Mark, also the crown and the hair are different as well.
That's right. And just the facial expression is slightly,
True.
there's a little more of a downturn in the lips, and you could go on and on, but it's, personally, I don't like it as much as the photographic proof. But anyway, Better Minds Stamp Advisory Committee, that's what they're that's what they were paid for in proofs, wasn't it? So anyway, if we move on. Now, this is just a brief slide on the background to the memorial. So we've talked about the stamp. This is about the memorial. The genesis for the memorial was for the Australian American Association, who wanted to establish a monument to perpetuate the work that the US had done in the war, and as it says, to symbolize comradeship in arms. Now, the interesting thing is, you've got to understand, the AAA had some pretty heavy hitters amongst its membership, because I doubt if they had that this would ever happen. On the committee was Richard Casey, who was the federal president. If you know anything about Australian history, you'll know that he was Australia's minister in Washington during the war, or for a great part of the war, and probably it was probably the making of him as an astute diplomat and politician. And I think he was influenced there by just the way that Washington does business. Something that obviously isn't the way things are done in Westminster. But I reckon we've got a lot of thank for the time he spent there. And Sir Keith Murdoch was the Victorian president. And certainly at that time, he was quite an influential person, not just because of his newspapers, but clearly the connections he'd made and the war connections that he had from the First War and obviously the Second. And it was decided that it had to be a pretty big design and a pretty big memorial. Now, I've never seen the words bigger than Texas, so it's probably as big as Alaska. There were 32 entries, and the winning design was from Richard, I think it's pronounced Ura, and it's essentially a steel cord column, which is octagonal, and it's got aluminium skin on the outside, with a huge, as most of you have been to Canberra will have seen, an aluminium eagle with the upswept victory sign wings. And I think they did a bloody good job in terms of the design, personally. Next slide, please. The eagle was created by Paul Beadle. He was an English sculptor who had come to Australia, and he was the head of the Newcastle Art School at the time. In terms of the site, there were 8 different locations considered before they selected the apex of Kings Avenue. And I think that's quite an appropriate site for those of you that know Canberra. It's very close to the defence area of Canberra, and it holds a very impressive point at the top of the way Burley Griffin had designed the various avenues. Robert Menzies lost the appeal. It was initially to raise £50,000, which was, I've said there, a vast sum. within 6 weeks, they'd raised £63,000. However, it was a period of rampant inflation. And I have to say, it makes our cost of living nonsense pale into insignificance. They really knew what inflation was. The cost at the end was £100,000. And that's only 2 years after they started getting the money. And that's without the CFMEU being involved. Goodness knows what the Victorian government would have ended up paying for that to be built had it been in Melbourne now.
Oh, they would have cancelled it and paid out $1 billion.
Well, it wasn't a games project. Anyway, before we leave the slide, the work commenced in December of 1952, and this was the same year that a US memorial had been erected in Brisbane, and that had been completed in over a year. And the reason I raise that is because what we're going to see on the next slide. Frank? As part of the fundraising for the memorial, there was at least one Cinderella. There may be others, and if any of you collect Cinderellas, you might be able to point me in the direction. But the only one I've been able to find is the one that I've illustrated there for the American National Memorial Appeal. And then below that is an illustration of the cover that was produced in Brisbane for the memorial at Newstead Park in Brisbane. And Gary Watson, you'll see I've used the expression temporary post office.
Excellent.
Which I believe is the correct definition.
I think you're right.
And this particular one is one of, I'm only aware of 2 examples of this cover that have been registered. I'm sure there are others.
There's about 30.
Yeah.
Good. And
31, perhaps.
What's important about this cover is that the postmark refers to the association, the Queensland branch, and it's quite a large council. And as we will find out shortly, there are no such councils for the memorial in Canberra. So in the words of the wise man, go figure. If we could have the next slide, please. These are illustrations of various Newstead Park. These are illustrations of the covers that were made for the initial ceremony in Canberra. And as you can see, the illustration on them is the Newstead Park Memorial from Brisbane. I suspect these were probably generated by possibly Rouvray Cox, because he features in at least 2 of them. You can see his signatures and a number of other people. I don't know who all those names are. I tried to research some of them. I don't know if they're members of the Geographical Society of Queensland, or they're people that were at the opening of the turning of the sod for the initial ceremony. But anyway, they're quite interesting. One of them has even gone all the way to Venezuela. That's the bottom right corner. Anyway, that's for the initial ceremony on the 10th of March 1953. Next slide, please, Frank. And here we are. We've got the site of the ceremony in January 1953, and just 3 months later, we've got a ceremony happening for the commencement of the construction. And below it is the plaque that was unveiled at the time by Sir William McKell, who was the Governor General. And so it was obviously a very big occasion in Canberra. And I dare say if one could pick out all the heavy hitters in the bleachers behind Robert Menzies, there'd be some historical figures there. Next slide, please. Now, this slide features Paul Beadle, who I said earlier was the designer of the Eagle. And there's Paul Beadle with his model of the Eagle. I managed to find a copy of a cover that had been signed by him. I suspect it's not contemporary, but no one can prove it or disprove it. I don't know how many he signed. It's the only one I've ever seen, but I'm sure it's not unique. And there's Richard Urey with the Eagle before it has been craned on top. And in the middle is the 1955 Archibald Prize of Paul Beadle, which I think is, personally, I think it's a great painting. I'd say as much of it was in this year's competition. And given what I saw on tonight's TV is the packing prize, I think I'd be voting for this one. Next slide. I managed somewhere along the line to find a copy of the invitation to the unveiling of the memorial to a Miss Russell. I don't know if that name Russell is connected with the Russell offices, which are the big defence complex near the memorial. It may just be a coincidence. But anyway, it's the only invitation that I've seen. I'm sure there are more around. But
don't you love one? Before you go, Mark, at the bottom right, the lower right in the invitation, it's got dress, morning dress, lounge suit, and uniform.
That's right. I was gonna note that. And the other interesting thing about it is that the invitation is on behalf of both the government and the association, and that gives you some idea of the pulling power of Richard Casey and Murdoch.
Morning dress was presumably for the ladies in attendance.
Beg your pardon?
The morning dress was for the ladies in attendance.
And the cross dressers.
And there's a photograph that I was able to get out of the archives. It's online, obviously, where the Queen has actually pulled the cord that's unveiled the opening plaque, and I'm not sure who that person is in uniform with the sword and the medals, but he's so overcome that he's got to bow to Her Majesty, while everyone else is looking up at the action. Next slide, please. And now we come to a little bit of philately. There were 9 proofs of the stamp made. 8 were numbered, 1 given to the Queen for the Royal Collection. But importantly and quite surprisingly, the 9th proof was for a presentation proof, which I'll talk about a little bit later on. But that last proof, numbered 37, was for Lieutenant General Bruce C. Clark, and I'll talk about him a little bit later on. The red proof was from Australia Post Royalty Collection, edited by Richard Brecken. I suppose it's royalty because the Queen was on it, but generally speaking, I wouldn't have picked this stamp for a collection of royalty, but clearly I don't think the same way as Australia Post. This particular copy came off eBay as a single, and I think it was no more than about $7, might have even been less. So probably the least inexpensive proof in my my collection. Next to it is one of the departmental publicity cards. A little bit's been written about that. I don't know much more. Apparently these things were sent out to overseas officials, apart from anyone locally, and they may well have promoted the stamp in New York, for example, in London. Some of you may know a little more about these than I do, but they turn out to be hard to find. I suspect Arthur Gray has a lot to answer for the concentration of these in one place, and for the fact that all of a sudden overnight they became quite popular and creditably expensive in a philatelic sense. The die proof that I'm showing there is the one that was presented to Chippendale, who was the secretary of the PMG's department. I think he may have been referred to as Director General, and that's why there's a little DG in pencil, and it's number 25. It's one of the few die proofs that I've seen of this issue that still have its cover, which is a little slip of paper that folds over the front of the die proof. Most of the other ones I've seen of this stamp don't have that on it, and I'm not sure how common that is amongst the proofs, whether most people who have had them have removed it. But it's certainly protected this proof, and the copy of the proof is the one that I show at the beginning on the slide.
Mark, I noticed that on that list of proofs, number 27 is not there, but the last one is 37 with a gap between 30 and 37. Is it possible that's a typo for 27?
No. That's probably one Jeff can answer. Jeff Kello.
I hope not.
No, I thought you might know something about the numbering systems that they
Well,
use.
the number is just the number of the proof of that stamp. Numbers 1 to 22 are going to be all the progressive proofs done in engraving.
Mm-hmm.
And the colour trials that were sent for selection of colour.
So
but why there's a gap from 30 to 37 is unusual.
Yeah.
Well, as I said, it's most unusual that there was a presentation outside of, if I could say, the usual circle. But I'll come to that in a moment. Okay, next slide. This is probably, apart from the proofs and the development, this is the only slide I actually give to the stamp itself. This is the information straight out of Jeffrey's catalogue. I don't think there's anything remarkable about the production and so forth. The only remarks I would make are these. Yesterday, I picked up a sheet that I'd bought on eBay for £2.20. So if you're lucky enough, you can still buy a sheet. The postage cost me double what the sheet cost. Having received it, I can only say it's from the left-hand side, but I can't work out whether it's sheet A or sheet C, because both of those, it's AB over CD, and you've got perf pips on the left side and on the right side. It's possible maybe that there's one row of one perf that hasn't been guillotined off properly, and maybe that's the bottom of the top perf. So possibly you could tell the lower sheet if there's an indicator still left on the selvage. You can certainly work out if it's from the left pane or the right pane, but I'm having difficulty working out if it's the top or bottom.
Yeah, right. Okay.
Um,
Your full
and-
sheet doesn't have perf pips both sides, though, does it?
Yeah, they both A, B, C, and D all have perf pips.
Both sides.
Oh, sorry, no. On A has them on the left, C
Yeah,
has them on
C-
the left.
Yeah, right.
B-
Yeah, okay. Yeah.
So you can work out. I've got sheets with right and left pips, but I can't tell whether they're the top or the bottom. And I don't know how many sheets there are out there that I can buy for £2.20. But if they keep coming up, I'll keep buying them, and one day I'll probably find that there's a guillotine mark inadvertently left, because actually one of the sheets has the finest little blue line running down the side, which seems to me to indicate possibly a guillotine line. But
That might be the central layout line.
beg your pardon?
There's central layout lines on the master plate
Right.
that are theoretically erased off the electrodes, but sometimes bits remain. So that could be the central layout line between the left and right pairs.
Right. Well, it obviously at some point when I get more interested in the stamp, I'll drill down a bit more.
Yeah, fair enough.
Next slide, please. This next section's on some maxi cards, and the only remark I'll make about this one, the first one, is those of you might remember that Richard Brecken did a presentation to the Society some while back, and it was about rates. And he indicated, for those of you that can remember, or those of you that were there to hear it, that there was an incredibly, for a short time, a special rate to New Zealand, an air rate. And you might recall it was 4p. And it was actually, you might recall Richard saying, for a short time, it was cheaper to send an airmail item to New Zealand than it was between anywhere in Australia. And if I've got this right, this card is overpaid for the period. Now, I might be wrong. I might have the period wrong. And I noticed someone's going to their reference, and perhaps they can work this out. But maybe 7p was the correct airmail rate to New Zealand at the time, but it's possible that this was overpaid. Next slide, please. These are more maxi cards. Now, between the last slide and this slide, that's showing every maxi card that I've been aware of. Now, I'm sure there are others out there, and perhaps any of you that are aware of any, let me know about them. But what's particularly nice about one of these cards, and I can't remember which one it is, but you'll see on the back, this one card in the lower left is cancelled in Canberra on the 4th. And the two cards on the right, one of them's cancelled in Sydney. I think it's the one at the bottom. 5 p.m. That's the other side of the card on the bottom right. So someone had the cards cancelled on the first day on the back, and then took them up to Sydney on the same day and had them cancelled on the picture side to make them a proper maxi card. I think that's unusual. They obviously got in a car or on a train or something that was particularly faster than Australia Post these days, and were able to get them cancelled in both places. Next, please. Now I move on to commercially produced first day covers, and there's probably nothing remarkable about most of these, but I want to just tell you just how one develops in philately. When I started chasing these, first day cover collectors said to me, "Oh, you've got to have them. They've got to be unaddressed. You know, they've got to be unaddressed, and if they're going to be addressed, they got to be typewritten. You don't want any of the hand stuff." And as I've developed this collection, I can tell you the one thing I've spurned, although because I've paid money for these, they remain in the collection, but I've actually spurned first day covers that haven't been in the mail.
Yeah.
And we're going to see some ones that are tatty and probably have been rejected, thankfully, by first day. Sorry, Frank, you probably you're not one of those, but you'll see as the collection has developed, I've moved away from these sterile covers. Next slide, please. We're still in the sterile period because I hadn't learned enough. Okay, I hadn't learned enough. I've tried to get as many commercial ones as I could without paying anything exorbitant, and I'm so proud of the Oxford Press one in the middle, because that one has not cost much at all. But I do know that someone who collects these, there was an article written up about someone who paid some ginormous sum of money on eBay for one of these, different color than this, so maybe that one was a rare color. But yeah, I believe the one in the middle is supposed to be quite scarce. I found the junior one not common. Guthrie ones are particularly common. And then you get these outliers like Royal, that for some reason someone's just bought one because they thought I better have a philatelically inspired cover. So I'll use one that has Elizabeth II on it, presumably because she's on the cover, because that's the only connection between the two. Mm-hmm. Next slide, please.
Oh, that was a generic Royal cover, which was used on a lot of stamps in the 50s.
And it's very boring.
It is.
Okay. Next slide. Now I learned a little bit. There's still some typewritten, but they're much more interesting. Take the top left. That's going to Macau. The one in the top middle, Egypt. And then the one in the top right, Ethiopia, of all places. And then the bottom left, and I particularly like this one. This one's going to East Germany. We're right in the middle of the Cold War, and we're showing the friendship between Australia and US in the picture on the left-hand side. It's somewhat ironic that they're red, but anyway, I just thought that gave me a bit of a laugh. The one in the middle is going to France. You don't see, I have to tell you, you don't see too many of those. Maybe Charles de Gaulle banned them or something. And then the one on the bottom right is going to West Germany. So I like the idea of, you know, both countries, as they were at the time, were receiving this particular stamp. Most of these are either underpaid, they seem to be underpaid or overpaid, obviously because it was threepence halfpenny, which was the letter rate internally in the British Empire rate. So obviously none of our overseas rates, except the overseas surface rate, was 7.5 pence. All the airmail rates and so forth are going to be rounded numbers. So if you were going to use these stamps, as many of the senders did, they exclusively used the stamp where they could. They're generally going to be overpaid a halfpence, or they're going to be underpaid, you know, threepence or something, tuppence halfpenny, something like that. Next slide, please. And you can see here, I got bitten by the destination bug, which I know Gary Watson's very keen on.
I approve of those.
And here we've got one to top left going to Nepal, middle one top going to Scotland. Particularly like that one because it's got eight of the stamps on it, which I believe that's as many as I've seen on any cover. There may well be more. I've yet to see one. I really would like to get more on a cover, but 8's the record. I love the next one that's gone all over India, chasing Mr. and Mrs. Flack. The bottom left is Mozambique, which I think is a fabulous destination. And then we've got the middle bottom is going to Denmark, and then sort of a Nordic relation of Iceland as the bottom right. I mean, these are, to me, these are fascinating destinations. I don't know whether they were common or not.
Iceland isn't.
Sorry?
Iceland certainly isn't.
What about Mozambique?
Yeah, that's a good one too.
Yeah. Anyway, it just shows you that even amongst pretty common covers, you know, philatelic covers, there is a modicum of interest. Next slide, please. And of course, I'm sure most of you are aware of the Sigma covers that were prepared by the drug company and sent out to doctors and chemists. I particularly like this one because it actually still had the contents in it, and it was nice to see what in fact was Sigma sending out in their first day, their covers. It's not rare. I'm sure there are plenty of them about, but anyway, I thought it was quite interesting, and a time when these sorts of drugs work very well. Roger, I hope your one, I think you said earlier, it's working well, but you're on your second course, where I think back in the day you probably would have been fixed up with one course of these, or at least that's what Sigma would have told you. Next slide, please. Now, you'll recall I earlier mentioned the presentation proof, number 37, was it, I think, to Lieutenant General Bruce C. Clark. He was the guest of honour at the Coral Sea Luncheon, which had been organised by the AAA in Melbourne at the Royal Ballroom. I think that's long been torn down. I don't even know where it was. One of you may well know. It was attended by at least 460 people, and each attendee was given a addressed Mappin and Curran first day cover, and it was delivered. I believe there were a whole bunch of PMG posties who went amongst the tables, handing out the letters to the people. I believe that's how it was done from reports. I don't believe the envelopes were left on the table as a sitting card device, but I could be wrong, but I do believe there was a delivery made during the luncheon. And during the luncheon, proof number 37 was presented to the General by Sir John Latham. And I would love to know where that proof is. It's, from best I can work out, it's not in the Smithsonian. It may well be with his descendants. It could be with an army museum. Could be at West Point. Good question. I've done the best I can online, but it really needs some detective work to track it down. But I believe
the bottom of his bird cage.
I believe that proof is unique in the sense that I'm not aware of any others that were presented outside of the normal circle. Jeff, you might know if there are any.
Yeah, I'm not sure. You'd have to check all the lists. I'm not sure.
Yeah, and General Clark was a very distinguished military person. You can look him up on any of the online things. He went on to I don't know if he made 4-star general, but he certainly had some important positions after commanding the US Army of the Pacific. Now, the question that came to my mind, though, was what the hell was a general doing at a Coral Sea presentation? It should have been an admiral. And the only thing I could think of is, I know the Korean War was just over. The Korean War ended in 1953, but perhaps the fleet was tied up going up and down the Sea of Japan, and they couldn't spare anyone from the Navy. But as most of you will know, the Battle of the Coral Sea, which was in early May over a number of days, was the first time that carriers fought carriers, and the ships were not in visual contact with one another. My reading tells me that as close as the fleets got to one another was 70 nautical miles, and neither fleet knew the other was there. It was like two people in blindfolds put in a room with guns, and they had to shoot the other one dead, and that's all they knew. Okay, but thankfully the Allied fleet won, and that ended the Japanese seaborne invasion of Port Moresby. So it obviously didn't end the overland invasion coming from the north, but the intention of the Japanese fleet was to take Port Moresby and establish essentially a major base in which they would have contained the whole of Northern Australia. An interesting side piece of information, I'm sure some of you have already read this somewhere or know about it. The US fleet used Navajo Indians to communicate all of their strategic information, and none of the Japanese, they didn't need code books. They just had Navajos talking to Navajo over the radios, and none of the Japanese could understand what the Indians were saying. Might I add, neither could any of the people in the Navy. No doubt that probably contributed to the win. And before we leave Coral Sea, the next battle, which really in a way has overshadowed the Battle of the Coral Sea, was Midway. Midway was only a month later, from the 4th to the 7th of June. And of course, I think Midway has captured Hollywood, and they've made all the war movies about Midway. I don't know if they've made any movies about the Battle of the Coral Sea. They may have, but as a kid, I remember all the ones were about Midway with
Carlton Heston.
and the I'm trying to think of I want to say Stewart. He may or may not have been in it, but certainly
No.
all the famous leading men of the time were certainly in the Battle of Midway. Next slide, please.
And Jimmy Stewart wasn't in it, Mark.
Well, I'm thinking, who's the dad who's
Fred McMurray.
he's bound to have been in it. But I'm thinking of the lady that went on to star in lots. She's still alive, good looking at 80. Her dad was in it.
Henry Fonda.
Henry Fonda. Thank you, Henry Fonda. He would have been Admiral Nimitz or someone like that.
Yeah.
Okay, now we move on. A brief slide about commercial first aid covers, which exist. They're quite common, obviously, because I've got 3 of them there, 2 of them to Buckley and Nunn. I'm sure all the stores in Sydney have, if you were able to rummage those, you'll find them. But again, it gives a bit of another side to the story. Next slide, please. Obviously, when you start rummaging through people's boxes, I'd like to say dollar boxes, but I think that's long gone. You come across the covers, the unusual things, you haven't seen them before. If you're not a postal historian, you go, that's very interesting. And then later on, when you do find about them, you start looking for them. And I have to say, this is a cover that only came my way in the last year or so, because there are a lot of people out there on eBay land that for some reason want express delivery. And then I particularly want one with the stamp on it. So, you hope that when it comes up, people are on holidays and they're not looking for it.
So it cost you $12.
Sorry?
Cost $12.
Yeah, you'll find prices. I don't like rubbing covers. I don't usually take markings off, but you'll find one of the covers here's got $10 still on it. But I like this one. It's got the letter rate, the registration fee, and the express delivery fee. And I think it's a very nice looking, attractive cover with the registration markings. And of course, as we do in the Antipodes, registration is red and express is blue. I know it's registration's blue in the UK. I'm not sure what express delivery is in the UK, maybe red. Anyway, next slide, please. Then we have unclaimed and returned mail. This is the only one that I actually currently have. Now, I know that I could make a whole collection of just fingers, right? And we could call it being given the finger, but this collection's big enough as it is, so one finger's enough. If I pick up a finger for $1, okay, it'll go into the collection, but I'm not going to be out there searching for them. But as most of you who come across dollar boxes, that there are a lot of fingers out there, and they're rampant and not rampant, and all sorts of angles and so on. So anyway, I like this one because on the back it's got the usual label, and it explains to the sender that if you don't want us sending this to the dead letter office and reading your mail, then you should print on it, return to sender within 7 days if it's unclaimed, and we won't read the dirty linen. Next slide, please. Underpaid covers. It's not just enough to have an underpaid cover. You have to know why it's underpaid where you can, and then if it's possible to show a range of the reasons. So we've got on the left, underpaid for weight. It weighed more than the first weight step, and it was taxed accordingly. The middle one was underpaid for both weight and destination. The one at the top was underpaid for destination, and the one at the bottom right was, pardon me, also paid underpaid for the destination. So, there's all manner of reasons why something may well be underpaid, and this is a small number that I've been able to acquire to try to show a breadth of underpayment. Next slide, please. Now, I left this one, which you can see cost $10, because whilst this is philatelic, this one I thought was the most interesting, and the reason being, it was registered and it was underpaid, but it was sent at the unsealed second class rate, because at what the flap has been just folded in. So it's not underpaid at the first class rate, but it appears to have been underpaid 7 pence when it should have paid 10 pence. So it's been it's been underpaid 5 pence and it's been taxed 10 pence, which it has. You can see on the back, and I love the GPO notation on it, that it was received without any contents. Because the person was trying to send it at the cheapest possible price for a registered thing. I don't even know how this thing was posted underpaid. We'll come to that in a moment, but someone was asleep at the wheel. That's all I'll say. I think it's the second most interesting underpayment in this presentation. Next slide, please. This was tax for customs clearance in the US. It was looked at and as a foreign letter package. So it must have had something in it. I say presumably, but it was passed by the US Customs, but the recipient had to pay 10 cents for the privilege of them looking. As I say, I'm a bit facetious here. I'm sure there were, but for the privilege of looking to find that there was nothing dutiable, they had to pay 10 cents, which I thought was a bit rich. Anyway, I'm sure there are people that collect this sort of stuff as well. Haven't seen too many with this stamp on it though. Next slide, please. I have to thank Martin Walker for providing me with the background to this. This is yet another registered letter that's been underpaid, but in this case, it's gone through the process by which the sending office has been debited money, and you'll see in the if you can read it, it's that small, the so-called fine print. it says, should a registered article received from another office be found deficient in postage or registration fee, a deficient postage docket, particular form, has to be filled out, made against such office, words put on the article, so it won't be debited twice, and then the docket's got to be forwarded at once to the Office of Posting, and at the same time a duplicate sent to the accountant of the state of issue. And the postmaster at the Office of Posting must collect the amount from the officer at fault. Can I say, try doing that with the unions today? No way, Jose. Now, I'll only point this out. How much money do you think all that took to chase the deficiency? Now, Martin, you might be able to tell us how long-lived this process was from the 1950s. I'm sure this may have been there 100 years beforehand, but I suspect with the rampant inflation of the 1950s, this didn't last terribly much longer.
I think you'll find it probably went well into the 1970s
Okay.
before the unions really put a stop to it.
Anyway, we can all have a chuckle now. I know how serious all this was then, but
most of the debit docket stuff you see actually comes from South Australia.
Yeah. This one's from Canberra, which you don't expect, but I've not seen too many of these with this stamp on it. In fact, this is the only one I've seen, to be honest. Next slide, please. This slide shows inconsistent treatment of stamps placed on the back of the envelope. The one at the top's going to Sweden, and part of the payment was put on the back. It's been postmarked diligently, and here's an example of a halfpenny overpayment, and it's gone to its address in Sweden. The one below, going to Vancouver, the very diligent postal official has refused to recognize the stamps on the back or even bothered to look, and it's been treated as underpaid, tenpence halfpenny, and quite a number of Canadian postage dues have been added. So that was a pretty costly sending to Mr. Archibald Esquire in Vancouver. I'm sure he was. I hope it was worth his while, whatever was in the letter. Next slide, please. Officially registered. Interestingly, these all appear to originate in or from Adelaide. Martin, you've probably got well, it's basically because they've all gone to the Electricity Trust except to Tattersalls. I think at least one of these are out of the Rod Perry tub. Okay.
I think all of them are.
It's the one that's got 1 and 6 written on it.
They may well all be, but they've not all come directly out of the tub. So some have come via eBay, but they're all slightly different. So they're all posted out of course. They've all been officially registered. 2 of them were paid at the letter rate, although containing value, and thus they were taxed twice the deficiency. The other one at the top right, that was prepaid properly by the looks of it. No doubt dropped in the mail, the slips, and it's been officially registered and noted, posted out of course, as had the bottom one, but that had only been paid at the letter rate, and no doubt the Electricity Trust were paying. They were getting enough fees from their customers that they can afford to pay the tax. And similarly with the one on the bottom left. but they're again very interesting. Those hand stamps to me appear to be ones that have been used for 100 years. Maybe not that long, but they're the old-fashioned. Someone might be able to comment on those.
Brass.
Yeah,
The ones at the lower right look a lot older.
yeah.
But
Mind you, the one on the lower left, I cannot say I've seen that before.
Mm.
Right. Yeah. Well, I was interested in that one because it's obviously different from the others, and yet it was posted at the Adelaide B, as was the other. So maybe they had more than one working, or maybe it was missing at the time. Who knows? But
I like the way the two lines are tet besh, so it doesn't matter which way you picked it up.
yeah, someone's gone to a lot of trouble. Okay. Next slide, please. OHMS use. Apart from the Chippendale proof, the next most expensive item in this collection is the G New South Wales perfins in the top. I have to say that is a ripper of a cover, in my view. Gone to New Zealand, been underpaid and taxed with a adhesive, cancelled. It's got everything going for it. Clearly, the railways didn't send a lot of stuff overseas, as you would expect. What the hell? Whoever Mr. Curtis is can pay. I don't know who he is. He might have left something on the train, and they were just telling him that they'd found it. Who knows? Before we leave this, I'm sorry if I'm going to upset anyone who worked for the public sector, but it never ceases to astound me how public institutions can spend private people's money. If you look at the two of those letters are both addressed to Dr. Morgan from the repatriation hospital, both posted on the same day, one at the basic rate, and obviously 2 stamps on it because it was probably beyond the weight step, but we're not going to use a cheaper stamp, and we're not going to put 2 letters in the one envelope, even though they're going to the same addressee, because hey, it's not our money. But I love looking at that, because it's how interesting to find 2 on the same date to the same addressee. Next slide. I'm mindful of the time, and I've been going a bit for 20 slides. It's taking a while, isn't it? I will speed up. I know some of you probably have other things to do.
I have to bid in an auction in about 15 minutes.
Okay. Well,
so it might be, Frank, you're doing the vote of thanks while I'm bidding away.
Now, briefly with this, I said the second most interesting text. The most interesting one, in my view, is the top left-hand corner. It's one of these Cocos Island covers, common as, but I don't believe I've seen too many that have been taxed for not paying the proper shilling. This one's paid the foreign rate to the US, but not the special rate for the Cocos trip. Hence, it's been underpaid, taxed, and the US stamps are put on the back. Underneath, bottom right, is an example of a proper, well, it's overpaid, but a proper payment. The other 2 are the polar flight that occurred in 1955. The top cover is for the round trip, and the middle cover is for a one-way trip to Holland and registered. So that's why there are 2 covers in it. Now, the bottom one, I don't know if anyone really are interested in flight covers, but this is probably, in my view, one of the most interesting covers in the whole collection, because in the Australian Airmail catalogue, it's misdescribed, or the date of the flight is wrong by 2 months, and this was a cover prepared by Harry Gordon, who was the foremost cover collectors, particularly jet flights. At the time, the Trans-Pacific covers were almost unknown, obviously apart from the Kingsford Smith. I don't know if any of you know of any other ones, but there couldn't have been too many Trans-Pacific covers in 1955. Now, Operation Bala Lagan was the name given to the RAF response to an invitation to fly 5 bombers to Washington, D.C. so they could be part of Armed Forces Day at the end of May in 1956. 5 English Electric Canberra aircraft from 82 Squadron left as part of this goodwill visit. The whole project began on the 11th of May when a US Air Force Globemaster carrying 20 ground crew and spares for the Canberras departed RAF Base Amberley in Queensland. You'll see why I'm drawing this out a little bit, because this is a most amazing story. On the way back, Group Captain Douglas had to land on Manus Island after having an engine flame out. One of the planes crashed on takeoff in Honolulu on the way back and had to be repatriated back by ship. And that's when they lost their starboard engine on takeoff from Hickam Air Force Base in Honolulu. So we had, they weren't very reliable aircraft. And another one of them experienced an engine flame out approaching New Guinea. Luckily, he was able to restart his engine after it dropped quite a few hundred feet. My research indicated that the cockpit temperature on the way back at 45,000 feet between Honolulu and Wake Island, where they stopped for fueling, was 82 degrees Fahrenheit below freezing. And when they were on the ground on Wake Island fueling, it was 155 degrees Fahrenheit. The Minister for Air announced on the 13th of June after they got back that the original cockpit temperature control system was inadequate and a revised system was about to be tested at Darwin. I can only say we're never going to get nuclear subs. Next slide.
But we'll still pay for them.
Of course.
This slide shows some airmail use of the covers. South Africa, via South Africa to Europe, South America, Africa, another one to South America. I particularly like the top left. That one was ultimately going to St. Helena. Next slide, please. Here's an example of a private aerogram with the stamp being used, paying the 10p aerogram rate at the time. Next slide, please. I know John Rennie's not watching tonight, but I particularly put these in for him. Illustrated covers. There's not too many with the stamp on it. but I was able to get two. One of them on the left is a standard pro forma front, and all they did was print the name of the place on it and then stick in the pictures for the place. But I've seen this cover on, I don't know, probably 50 different scenes around Australia. Next slide. Now I'm moving on to philatelic covers, postmarks, etc. The idea here is what events took place during the year of issue. So in 1955, I'm on the lookout for commemorative postmarks, etc., etc. It turns out, if I'm to believe picture marks, there are 6, of which 3 pertain to the Scouts, 2 pertain to the summit of Mount Kosciuszko, and 1 has to do with Ampex in Adelaide, which is, you'll see the bottom left is illustrative of Ampex Adelaide, but of course Ampex Adelaide was later in the year, coinciding with the centenary of the South Australian adhesive stamps. So there's nothing special about this cover other than it's a first day of issue of the memorial stamp.
Mark, that's also the cover that's got the original dates of Ampex before they were changed.
Oh, good. Well, I'll be able to add that.
Yeah.
Thank you. The middle one I particularly like. This is the I don't know if this was the dinner. I think this is from the dinner at the Paviour's Arms of the British Commonwealth Specialist Society, and I noticed, is it Jack Guilfoyle or John, whoever I know he's a very famous collector. His is the bottom signature, and he must have. I'm thinking that he must have flown over with the stamp, because the convention's on the 21st of May. I mean, I suppose it's possible he took a ship. I mean, I guess a ship in 1950s could make it from Australia to England in, what's that, 3 weeks? Easy. But
a very wealthy guy, probably took the plane.
I suspect he flew, which was a huge cost at the time. But anyway, it's a very nice use of the stamp for their 9th annual convention. There's the Bendigo Second Philatelic Conference. Nothing special there. It's just I've managed to get the stamp used on that cover, and then below is the use of the famous summit picture mark 1135. Now, interestingly, according to picture marks, this stamp, this cancel was meant to have been used in June of 1955. I've never seen one. It has its own number of 1120. Never seen one. I don't know whether it exists.
I don't think it exists. I haven't seen one.
I mean, why on earth would you bring it out 6 months before you? Anyway, we better move on. And then there's one of the Scout covers. I said there were 3. I've shown 2 of them. The missing one is the 6-sided Scout one. And then there are 2 covers, one from Mawson Base and the other from Macquarie Island, which again, I'm just looking for some interest. Different destinations using these stamps. I don't know whether the top left is philatelic. Clearly the bottom one is, but they're interesting. And we can move on. Concessional rate. The rate went from 3 halfpenny to 4 for the basic letter rate from 1 October 1956, but the new printed matters rate, if I can call it that, was 3 halfpenny. So anyone that had a whole bunch of 3 halfpenny stamps could continue to use them, but at the printed matter rate. And the left cover is illustrative of that. The right cover is illustrative of a penny forces concessional letter rate plus a 9p registration fee, because there was no concession given for the registration fee, only for the letter rate. I haven't found too many of those again with this stamp on it. Next slide, please. I just love these. Obviously philatelically inspired, but the top one was for the visit of Lyndon Baines Johnson to Australia. And we all remember the famous "All the Way with LBJ" slogan. And someone has had the presence of mind to think, oh, I can put a USA memorial stamp on it and pay the basic rate, and I've got a really nice cover. The one below is going to I can't remember his first name. I'm sure he was a client of yours, Gary. The Williams guy in the US that collected, was he Northern Territory or something like that?
That was Ed Williams.
Oh, this is someone else.
He was in Buffalo.
This is totally different.
Yeah.
Whoever he is. Anyway, this is the opening of the North West Cape. Again, someone's had the presence of mind to do a dual currency mixed franking. They're the only two that I've ever seen. Maybe there's something else that occurred between 1955 and when these were demonetized. If any of you know, let me know and I can start looking for it. Next slide. We're nearly there. I just love these. Just the beautiful cows just grazing in the paddock around the memorial, as it probably was for the 10 years after it was unveiled. and then of course the one on the right is the iconic picture, and I don't know if any of you, this is used quite a lot in promotional scenes. I like the two lightning conductors right at the tip of the eagle's wings. And it's the classic V for victory, not too subtle for our Asian, our Japanese visitors. And then finally, I wrap up with this one, just to remind you that we've had a fascination with the US well before the memorial stamp, and probably the crowds that came out for the Great White Fleet when it visited Melbourne and Sydney and Albany are probably unprecedented, either before or since. And it truly pales into insignificance to the hoopla with the memorial stamp. Anyway, I hope that's it. I've gone way over time. I'm sorry for that. But I think I've kept most of you engaged. I don't know if I can answer any of your questions because I've probably told you all I know about these.
Frank, I'm going to have to let you take over for the next couple of minutes.
Oh, geez.
Happy bidding, Div.
Oh,
Yeah.
yes. It's 1884 from the Transvaal to South Australia.
So we should all get on the line now.
Well, you can still bid. You can still
I am
bid,
going to bid.
There's a memorial connection there, isn't there? I better go and.
All right, you want me to take over, do you?
Please.
All right.
Or you
Well,
can talk amongst yourselves for about 4 minutes,
4 minutes, why?
because that's when it'll finish.
Well, I'll just give a vote of thanks while you're doing that. I think
Yep.
Mark, you've done a fantastic job. I don't know what everyone else thinks, but the publicity that Gary gave you, I reckon it was great. The job that you've done on this, the research you've done, you've gone into the background of the stamp, background of the events. You've done philatelic material, you've done commercial material, proofs, you name it. It can show you, it can show everyone what you can do with not much money, but a little bit of ferreting, trying to find the stuff, but also a lot of research. And I know, Mark, you love researching, so that's your that's your forte. So anyway,
only if I find the answers. I'm not too happy when I've spent a lot of time for no return.
yeah, but I think you had some excellent covers at those destinations like Iceland and Mozambique. You know, they were fantastic. I know Gary loved them. That's Gary.
My favourite cover was actually one I wouldn't have in my collection because it's not going overseas, and that was the military concession with uprated for registration. I think that's a fantastic cover.
Yes, yeah, I like that one, and I like those debit covers as well. I reckon they were fantastic as well. I've never seen one. That's the first time I've ever seen one. Anyway, Mark, congratulations. On behalf of the society, thank you very much for displaying. I know you did this for me ages ago when I was president. I said I needed a backup, and I think you've added a fair bit to it since then.
Well, I never thought it'd see the light of day, so I'm very grateful to Roger. I'm sorry the circumstances, Roger, that that you weren't able to present tonight, and I know that we all look forward to seeing your one because it's very interesting. But anyway, this is the best we can do in the meantime.
No, it's really
Very good.
I think done an excellent job. On behalf of the society, thank you very much, and could everyone just give our usual thank you.
Thank you.
Well,
Thank
mate.
you.
And
Can I add to that, Frank?
yeah, sure.
I think this is a really important display for the reasons that you've mentioned about showing that you can do a lot with a little. And I think it's the sort of display that should get out to the suburban societies where, you know, anything to do with the Royal, they're intimidated by, and they think, oh, you know, you can't go to the Royal because everything's about money and so on. And I think that this might actually help bridge that gap by showing that serious philatelists can have a lot of fun without spending a lot of money and create something that's both philatelically interesting and also socially interesting. And yeah, I commend you highly for what you've done. I think it's terrific.
Yeah, so do I.
Oh, thank you. And but thank all of you for sticking it out.
Hey, I think affordable philately is the path forward for many collectors, especially the people in the street, because this is the way that you get them interested.
I think what Brighton's doing at the moment, you know, with their the last annual competition where they had 16 entries, which that was affordable philately. There wasn't anything there that was extravagant. It was just normal run-of-the-mill stamps. You know, people doing something out of the ordinary. So you know, I think that's fantastic. And you know, the more we do it, I think our hobby will survive. If that doesn't happen, our hobby wants to survive. People think, you know, like Gary said, the Royal, you know, it's going to be extravagant and, you know, highfalutin displays. Well, they don't have to be.
No.
Anyway, over to you, Gary.
Beautiful. Thanking you. Thanks for taking over for that couple of minutes I needed.
Did you get it?
I did.
No, you obviously didn't have much competition.
I was surprised. I'd heard of the first issue of Transvaal to South Australia, so there must be a small correspondence, but I hadn't heard of one for 10 or 12 years. And there was another couple of years later using different issues to Tasmania. So
Well,
I bought that too.
Hopefully, Gary, it was affordable philately. I hope it was. You don't need to go there, but
These things are all relative, of course.
That's right. they're all relative to Gary.
Well, the thing is, I'd never seen, you know, you could try and get Australia to Transvaal in this period, 1884 or 82.
And
I
yet you
don't know
didn't
if I've
buy
seen-
South Australia to Southwest Africa before it was anything.
Yeah, but it
Or
wasn't Southwest Africa then.
it wasn't anything.
I know it was Cape. It
It
was
was
Cape.
Terra
Cape of Good
Nullius.
Hope.
No, it
Cape
wasn't.
of Good Hope. Anyway,
If it had been British and the Germans marched in, there would have been a war, mate.
Anyway, I'm going to fast forward through this. For the rest of the meeting, thanks, Frank, for doing the vote of thanks. We have no new applications, which is unfortunate. For the next meeting, there's going to be a special meeting on the 15th of August to update the rules of the RPSV to modernise the rules. So what we need is a quorum. So we need over 20.
We need 20, exactly.
So for those people who are local, if possible, if you could attend this meeting to change the rules, things like the ability to use online banking on behalf of the Royal, the ability to use a credit card. These things aren't part of our Royal rules. So these are the things that we need to change to move forward.
We also got to update it because the model rules have changed as of the 1st of July last year. And we got to update and update it so our rules conform to the model rules. Or what happens if something happens down the track and our rules don't conform with they just go automatically to the model rules, but we might not want what is in the model rules, we want something else. So it's got to be in our rules.
Yeah, anyway.
Clear as mud.
Clear as mud. We're also celebrating Edward Brentnell, who I think was mostly a daytime member. 50-year membership. It's Monday the 17th of June, which is at the Riversdale Golf Club. If there's any local members who wish to attend, please get in touch. And I don't believe there's any general business. I don't have anything here.
Gary.
Sorry?
Yeah, Gary, can I just ask what reception you've had to your modernisation of your logo? Because I suggested the same thing to the South Australian Council that uses a Queen Victoria image.
Everybody's been really positive. I expected to get a lot of pushback. Even in council, I expected pushback from a couple of the members, and they all said, no, let's go for it.
Well,
so I've only heard positive things. No one's thrown rocks at me about it. So I think it's a great move forward. I actually like the look of it.
I think it's too wide. I'd be inclined to drop the first letter.
I can't do that. So going to go into future meetings. So we have the daytime meeting on the 4th. Ted Gallagher will be showing 1959, I was about to say 1859, 1959, Australian Definitives Part 2. The Postal History Group is on the 12th, and they'll be doing, I think it's hospitality.
Yep.
And then the philatelic meeting on the 20th, start at 7 o'clock with some wine and cheese. And then we've got the annual competition, bigger than the Royal of London. I'll pump that tyre up. And finally, the library afternoons on the 29th at 2 p.m. If I've got nothing else from everybody here, we had, I think we had 20 in.
We had 20, some dropped off.
So it's really, I mean, I think the Zoom meetings are really good for us, especially for our interstate and overseas members, just to have access to what we're doing. And, I look forward to seeing you all at the next meeting. If there's nothing else, I'll close now. And thanks, Mark, for a wonderful display. I really enjoyed it. I did pump its tyres up, and I think everybody else thought, it was really, really good as well.
I hope they didn't burst.
Thank you very much indeed.
All right, guys. Thanks very much.
Thanks,
good to see you all
guys. See you
again.
later.
And
Bye.
we'll see you very soon.
See ya.